Well, and a lot of times when you lease onto a carrier, you're dealing with contracted freight as opposed to when you get your own authority. Unless you have that already set up or those connections made, a lot of times you're dealing with brokers or the spot market. Leasing onto somebody as far as their authority goes is a lot more consistent, or it can be. It's a great way to get your feet wet to see if that's something that you want to do moving forward.
Yeah. Welcome back to the show. Over the past several weeks, we've been giving you a sneak preview of OOIDA's upcoming Truck to Success seminar, a 3-day event that runs through the steps to not just becoming an owner-operator, but becoming a successful one. Today, we're going to focus on another decision that might come up, leasing to a carrier. Joining us with the details, Aron Lynch, Compliance Specialist at OOIDA, and OOIDA Executive Vice President, Lewie Pugh. Aron, Lewie, good to see you.
Good to see you, Scott.
Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. So we talk about this from time to time, and it's something I know that comes up during Truck to Success. Someone comes in, they think they might want to go out on their own. The timing might not be right. So I imagine this part of the seminar, tips about leasing onto a carrier, was kind of incorporated with that in mind. This is sort of a middleman approach. Is that kind of a good way to look at it, I suppose?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, some benefits of leasing onto a carrier are that they're going to find you freight, they're going to do your billing, they're going to do a lot of your back office things, collections, things of that nature. So it makes it a lot easier so that you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff as far as that goes when you're referring to leasing onto a carrier itself as opposed to getting your own authority.
Yeah. And that is a decision that comes up quite a bit too, because again, you might not be ready to do the bookkeeping and do all that stuff. This is kind of a nice way to kind of ease into that, I suppose.
Yeah, it also gives you cash flow because thanks to the leasing regulations, they have to pay in 15 days of the time you turn in all required paperwork. So, I mean, there's companies out there 30, 60, 120 days out on pay. So this keeps you from that kind of thing. It's sort of the natural progression. You buy a truck, you lease to a carrier, you do that for a little while, then usually you go out on your own. I mean, some people go right into it, and I'm not saying they don't, but sometimes those people struggle. It also kind of gives you, when you buy a truck, there's a lot going on there. You got a lot to do, a lot to learn. So that takes some of the pain of it, I guess, out of it to allow you to kind of focus, kind of learn routes, learn trucking, learn if, what you want to do, kind of that stuff, and then you can kind of decide if you want. I mean, lots of people, and myself included, they're leased forever to carriers.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this notion in trucking that to be you got to get your own authority, be your own carrier to be super successful. That's not always necessarily the truth. And what you have to think about, and people don't want to argue about, is if you buy a truck, get your own authority, and you go out here and you haul for brokers all the time, you're giving away a chunk of change, and you don't really know what you're giving up when you're hauling for brokers. Then a lot of people, they factor because they have cash flow issues or they don't have the cash, so now you're giving up a percentage for that. And maybe you pay somebody. I mean, a lot of people now use these services to file their IFTA and file this and file that for them. When you start paying all these people all this stuff,
that money goes away real quick.
That money goes away real quick. And, the argument's always, well, I'm giving this carrier a percentage of my check. Well, you're giving all these people a percentage. And the brokers, you don't even know what you're giving them to. And you got to worry about getting paid and chasing your money and all these other things. So these are things that people really need to think about that they do. They just think, I'm going to get my truck, get my own motor carrier authority, and be my own boss. And hey, I mean, if you got direct customers and stuff like that, then it's a good deal for you to get your own authority probably. But again, like was said earlier, you got to be honest with yourself too. How much of this stuff do you want to do? I didn't want the DOT coming to my house necessarily and auditing me and doing some of this. It was easy. Let them the carrier deal with that crap. Or who I'm leased to.
Well, and a lot of times when you lease onto a carrier, you're dealing with contracted freight as opposed to when you get your own authority. Unless you have that already set up or those connections made, a lot of times you're dealing with brokers or the spot market. Leasing onto somebody as far as their authority goes is a lot more consistent, or it can be. It's a great way to get your feet wet to see if that's something that you want to do moving forward.
Yeah.
And we've been in a down market for almost 2 years now.
Feels like forever. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like forever. It really feels like forever
Yeah.
for the poor men and women out there on the road. But
Yep.
with
Sure
that,
does.
that's a big thing you see in down markets. You see guys with their own authority, they shut their authority down and lease back to carriers
Yeah.
where they got contract rates because the spot market is just so volatile right now.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier, Aaron, about carriers. They're not all created equal, obviously. You've got good ones, you've got bad ones out there. You do have to be careful, right? You want to make the right decision on this, especially if you're starting out. What types of things should people be looking for in a carrier? Maybe what questions should they be asking as well? What advice do you give people out there?
So number 1, 2, and 3 is contract.
Yeah.
You always want to make sure that you are able to ascertain the contract, have time to read the contract, and don't actually get in the truck first or haul a load for them before it's read.
And don't
if
sign anything.
Right,
before
and don't
that's
sign
all
anything.
done, yeah.
And if you need help reading it, hire somebody to read it. Have a friend look at it. I'll look at it. That's what we do in the compliance department. Hire a lawyer if you want to do that. There's so many different variations that you can go or routes that you can go. There's avenues that you have to follow as far as that goes. Because if you just go haul a load and you've never read the contract, you don't know what you're actually getting paid. You don't know what's in there.
And you've heard, you hear horror stories all the time about people that lease on and it's not a good situation.
Well, yeah, and I have people calling in all the time, too, that have been hauling for a year or two and don't even have a contract. Oh, I don't have one of those. Well, how do you know how much you're getting paid?
Yeah.
Or something goes awry and you want to know, well, how do I solve the issue? Well, it's really hard to, the first question a lawyer is going to ask you is, what's in the contract? Let me see it.
Yeah.
You know?
And, to be fair, too, and we've talked about this before, some of these, these contracts are not, it's not a fun read. They're not easy to ascertain sometimes, what's going on with this or that. And as you mentioned, OOIDA members, you will look over the contract for them and maybe point out red flags. Are there things in particular, Lewie, that you hear from people about these contracts, about leasing on, that, advice that you give people when they're thinking about making this decision?
Yeah, and just to point out, OOIDA will do this for you for free if you're a member.
Yeah,
you have to
that's
hire
right, yeah.
anybody. It's
Yeah.
a free service offered to anybody who's a member. So for $45 a year is a lot cheaper than hiring any attorney to read a contract for you, for sure.
Yeah.
And they look at this stuff, like Aron, he looks at this stuff every single
All day,
solitary day to make sure they follow the regulations. And of course, you got to watch it. And the biggest thing you have to watch is like chargebacks and stuff like that, plus know the percentage and know what you have to do to cancel the contract and stuff like that. Those are the big things you want to look at. I always tell people, if you're going to lease to a motor carrier, use your eyes, use your ears, talk to people, see what they're already leased there, but also look at equipment. If the people that are leased there are running good equipment with good tires and stuff like that, they're probably making money and they're probably doing okay. If they're running trucks with mismatched hoods and fenders and their tires are bald and stuff like that, and there may be a one-off, but if they're running stuff like that, probably not making money, and it's probably not a place you want to lease to. And you want to lease to somebody to do something that you want to do too. If you don't want to go to New York City, then you want to make sure you're not leasing to a motor carrier that the mass majority of their freight's the Northeast in New York City.
Yeah.
It happens all
Do
the
your
time.
research.
Do your research,
Yeah.
know their lanes, know where they go, and make sure it's stuff that you want to do and haul and where you want to go.
During these seminars, you've got a room full of people and people on Zoom who are, tuning in and absorbing all this information. And as we've talked about before, it's 3 days of a lot of information. It's everything you need to know to kind of get started here. When this topic comes up with people in the room, what questions do they typically have for you? What concerns do they have for you when considering this, again, as an option?
Well, they want to know that they have job security, with their own authority that gives them the empowerment to actually go out there and earn their stripes on their own instead of relying on a carrier to do so. As far as that goes, I would say another thing that they usually ask for is, what's the market look like? Is this something that is going to be better for me in the long run, or is this something that's going to be better for me short term as opposed to getting my own authority, as far as that goes? I would tell somebody, don't rush into anything. make decisions based off of all the information that you obtain, right? And like pointing back to what Lewie was saying, you want to check their equipment. You want to check word of mouth, right? You want to check who works there, things of that nature, what they have to say about the company. But even take it a step further sometimes. Look at Google reviews. There's so many of those out there nowadays that it takes 5 minutes to do. Go on the Safer website and go ahead and check to see their authority history, if there's ever been any kind of revocations. Look at their crash history or their violation record, just to see if that's something that you may want to deal with or not. They have a high percentage of out of service. Chances are you're going to get pulled over a lot more. Take that into consideration, because those could be violations on your motor vehicle record as well.
Yeah. Yeah, great points. Yeah, and as you kind of point out, it's going to be different for everybody, right? One situation that may work out for someone who likes to haul in New York City, I don't know who those people are, but they may find a carrier that fits their needs very well, and there may be another person where it doesn't, right? So as you kind of pointed out too, don't rush into it. This is a big decision, and you want to make sure you have all the facts. And any carrier that wants you, they shouldn't be pushing anything on you, right? It should be a situation where you can ask questions and you're going to have a conversation about what they're looking for as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. If they're trying to push you to do something, then probably real quick, then that's probably a red flag within itself. I mean, I don't ask them to see what their freight is or what some of the rates are. I wouldn't be afraid to ask any of that stuff. And then remember, once you're leased, they work for you just like you work for them. So don't be afraid to, to be that squeaky wheel, because it gets the grease.
Yeah.
Guys, and don't be afraid to ask for more money. And I would recommend you go somewhere where they pay you percentage as opposed to mileage. But don't be afraid on a load to say, to negotiate. Because even when you're leased to a motor carrier, when you're being paid percentage especially, you can still negotiate with their agents, or the agents can negotiate with the customers for you. And don't be afraid. And if you have a problem or an issue, again, don't be afraid to call the main office and say, what the heck's this, or why this, and be afraid to push. If they're a reputable company and you're a good owner operator for them, they're going to do what they got to do to make things right.
Yeah. As we kind of wrap things up here, looking ahead to October and the seminar, when going over this particular topic, just to give people kind of an idea of, we've just scratched the surface here, obviously, but you go through, contracts, what to look for what to look for in a contract. Kind of run through real quick what you kind of go over with people there during the seminar.
So a lot of the things we go over are what to look for in the contract and the actual leasing regulations itself. There's certain criteria that need to be met in the contract and that need to be followed, such as escrow, such as red flags, such as owner-operator versus authority versus lease purchase versus renting a truck from like a Penske or something like that. So we try to break down everything in that regulation that actually will apply to your everyday life. The biggest piece of advice somebody can get from this discussion here is to always look at the contract, operate by that contract, and don't ever haul anything without that contract. And to always establish first and foremost, look at the original bills of lading. Start that relationship first. Don't go 6 months or a year and then ask for it. Establish that part of the relationship right off the bat.
Yeah. Again, great advice. 3-day seminar answers all these questions and a lot more, which we'll continue to have conversations about in the weeks to come. Aron, Lewie, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Scott.
And some housekeeping here. Truck to Success runs for 3 days starting October 22nd in Blue Springs, Missouri. There is an in-person option and a virtual option. The early bird deadline to register, which comes with a discount, is September 1st. For more information, check out truck2success.com. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. Landline Now continues right after this.